I found out my home owners association wanted to ban winter deliveries to my house on the coldest Tuesday in January, when the wind chill hit -15 degrees, and Patricia Kendrick from the HOA board stood on my front porch with her clipboard, and her pursed lips that looked like she'd been sucking on lemons for the past decade. Aaron Quincy, we need to talk about the excessive traffic your business is causing in our peaceful neighborhood, she said, her breath coming out in frosty puffs. She was wearing a cream-colored parka that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, and her blonde highlights were frozen stiff from the walk over. I leaned against my doorframe, feeling the warmth from inside my house meeting the brutal cold outside. Patricia, I run a heating fuel supply company. People need fuel in the winter. That's kind of how it works. The HOA board has received numerous complaints about the trucks coming and going from your property, she continued, ignoring my logic completely. We're implementing a new rule effective immediately. No commercial deliveries to residential properties between November 1st and March 31st. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. You're banning winter deliveries to a heating fuel supplier's house. Do you understand how insane that sounds? Her expression didn't change. The rules apply to everyone equally, Aaron. Your trucks are creating ruts in the roads, they're noisy and they are unsightly. Mrs. Henderson says the diesel smell gives her migraines. Mrs. Henderson lives 4 houses down, and my trucks are only here for maybe 20 minutes twice a week when I need inventory transferred, I said, feeling my patience wearing thin. And you do realize that I supply heating oil to half this neighborhood, right? Including the community center. That's irrelevant, Patricia said, making a note on her clipboard. The vote was unanimous. $5,000 fine for each violation. Have a good day, Aaron. She turned and walked away, her boots crunching on the frozen sidewalk, leaving me standing there wondering if I'd just hallucinated the entire conversation. I pulled out my phone and called my business partner, Marcus, who'd been with me since I started Quincy Heating Solutions 5 years ago. You're not going to believe what just happened. Let me guess, Marcus said, and I could hear him grinning. Patricia struck again. How'd you know? Dude, she tried to find me last month because my Christmas lights were 2 inches over the property line into the grass median. She measured. With a tape measure. I'm honestly surprised she hasn't tried to ban breathing during certain hours. I told him about the winter delivery ban, and the humor drained from his voice immediately. Wait, she's serious. Aaron, we've got 3 pallets of oil filters, 2 dozen fuel pumps, and that new inventory management system being delivered Thursday. And that's not counting the fuel truck that comes every Monday and Friday. I know, I said, walking back inside and shutting the door against the cold. I'm going to have to figure something out. My wife Emma came down the stairs, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, carrying our 2-year-old daughter Sophie. Was that Patricia? I saw her from the bedroom window and thought about hiding. She's banned winter deliveries to our house. Emma's eyes widened. What? But your entire business depends on winter deliveries. That's your busy season. Apparently, the HOA board thinks my trucks are more important to regulate than, people staying warm during a Vermont winter. We lived in Stowe, Vermont, a beautiful mountain town that was picture-perfect 9 months out of the year and absolutely brutal during the winter. Our neighborhood, Pine Ridge Estates, was one of those planned communities with strict HOA rules about everything from mailbox colors to grass height. I'd bought the house 3 years ago because it had a large garage that I could use for my business storage, and the location was perfect for reaching my customer base throughout Lamoille County. I'd known the HOA was strict, but this was approaching parody levels of absurdity. Thursday came, and I had to make a choice. I could either refuse the deliveries and potentially lose thousands of dollars in delayed inventory, or I could accept them and risk the $5,000 fines. I called my lawyer, David Chen, who'd handled the incorporation paperwork for my business. "Aaron, I've seen a lot of HOA overreach, but this is a new one," David said, papers rustling in the background. "Let me look at your CC and Articus, the codes, covenants, and restrictions you signed when you bought the house." He called me back 2 hours later. "Okay, so here's the situation. The HOA does have the right to regulate commercial activity in residential zones to a certain extent. However, there's nothing in your original CC and Articus about seasonal delivery bans. This is a new rule they just created. So what can I do?" Well, they have to give 30 days notice before implementing new rules that significantly impact homeowners. They can't just spring this on you with immediate effect. You've got grounds to challenge this. But Aaron, I'm going to be honest with you. Fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. These people have nothing but time, and they love spending other people's money on legal fees. I thanked him and hung up, feeling the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. My delivery arrived Thursday afternoon, a large truck carrying the equipment and supplies I needed. Patricia appeared within minutes, like she'd been watching through binoculars from her house. "That's your first violation," she announced, taking photos with her phone. $5,000. The invoice will be added to your HOA dues. "Patricia, my lawyer says you can't implement this rule without 30 days' notice," I said, keeping my voice calm even though I wanted to scream. "We sent an email to all residents on Monday," she replied. "That's sufficient notice according to our bylaws." "Your bylaws don't override state law," I countered. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see about that. If you refuse to pay the fine, we can place a lien on your property." Over the next week, I researched everything I could about HOA law in Vermont. I attended the next HOA board meeting, which was held on a Wednesday evening at the community center, a beautiful timber frame building that served as the neighborhood hub. The heating system there was one of my installations, a high-efficiency oil furnace that I'd put in 2 years ago and still serviced regularly. The community center was warm when I arrived, about 20 other homeowners scattered throughout the room. Patricia sat at the front table with the other 4 board members. Dennis Morrison, a retired accountant who looked perpetually confused. Yolanda Price, a real estate agent who always seemed to be on her phone. Keith Stanton, who owned a car dealership in town. And Brenda Wu, a younger woman who'd only recently joined the board and seemed uncomfortable with the whole thing. "We'll now hear from residents who signed up to speak," Patricia said, looking directly at me. "Aaron Quincy, you have 3 minutes." I stood up and walked to the front, my notes in hand. "I'm here to formally contest the winter delivery ban. First, it was implemented without proper notice. Second, it specifically and disproportionately affects my livelihood. Third, and most importantly, it's not just impractical, it's dangerous. I supply heating fuel to 37 homes in this neighborhood, including this community center. If I can't receive inventory and supplies at my house, which is also my business headquarters, I can't service my customers efficiently." "Your business operations are not the HOA's concern," Patricia interrupted. "Actually, they are, because 18 of those 37 customers are HOA board members or their immediate families," I continued. "Dennis, I filled your tank last week. Keith, I replaced your furnace filter on Tuesday. Patricia, I delivered 200 gallons of heating oil to your house yesterday morning." That got some murmurs from the crowd. Patricia's face tightened. "That's different. You're providing a service, not running truck traffic through the neighborhood. The trucks that deliver to me are the same trucks that deliver to you, I said. The only difference is that mine come to my house where I can efficiently manage inventory and dispatch. If you ban deliveries to my house, I'll have to rent a commercial space outside the neighborhood, which means more total truck traffic as I drive back and forth, longer response times when you have emergencies, and higher costs that I'll have to pass on to customers. Brenda Wu spoke up, surprising everyone. That's actually a good point. Aaron, how many truck deliveries do you currently receive per week? During winter, about 4. 2 fuel trucks and 2 supply deliveries. Each one is on my property for less than 30 minutes. And how many service calls do you make to homes in this neighborhood? During winter, probably 20 to 25 per week. She turned to Patricia. So we're banning 4 brief deliveries to one location, which will result in increased traffic and decreased service efficiency for dozens of residents. Patricia's jaw clenched. The rules must apply equally to everyone. We can't make exceptions. But we're not applying rules equally, I said, pulling out my own research. Janet Summers runs a catering business from her home and receives deliveries year-round. Bob Patterson has pool supplies delivered constantly in the summer. Carol Mendez gets fabric shipments for her sewing business twice a week. Why is my business being singled out? The room erupted in conversation. Patricia banged her gavel. Those are different situations. How? I demanded. They're not creating the same level of disruption. I'd love to see the complaint records, I said. How many actual complaints have you received about my deliveries? With names and dates. Patricia's face flushed red. That information is confidential. Actually, under Vermont HOA law, complaint records are available to homeowners upon request, I said, citing the statute David had given me. I'm formally requesting those records. The meeting deteriorated from there, with Patricia trying to maintain control while other homeowners started asking questions about selective enforcement of HOA rules. I left feeling like I'd scored some points, but knowing Patricia wasn't going to back down easily. My next fuel delivery was scheduled for Monday. I called Marcus to discuss our options. What if we just deliver it anyway? Marcus suggested. Let her rack up the fines, then we take it to court. I've been reading about this, and there's a Vermont case from 2019 where a judge threw out similar HOA fines because they were deemed unreasonable restrictions on lawful business. That's a gamble, I said. If we lose, we're on the hook for potentially tens of thousands in fines. But if we comply, your business suffers, your customers suffer, and Patricia wins. He had a point. I hated the idea of just rolling over, but I also had a family to support and a business to protect. The weekend gave me time to think, and on Sunday evening the temperature dropped to -20. My phone started ringing around 9 p.m. It was Dennis Morrison. Aaron, I hate to bother you, but my furnace just quit. House is getting cold fast. I'll be right over, I said, grabbing my tool bag and heading out into the brutal cold. Dennis's furnace had a clogged fuel filter, an easy fix that took me about 40 minutes. While I was there, I got 2 more emergency calls. By midnight, I'd serviced 4 furnaces in the neighborhood, including one that belonged to Yolanda Price from the HOA board. Monday morning, my fuel delivery arrived at 6 a.m. I deliberately scheduled it early, hoping to avoid Patricia's surveillance. No such luck. She was outside in her parka by 6:15, camera in hand. That's violation number 2, she called out. Another $5,000. I was exhausted from the late night calls and in no mood for her nonsense. Patricia, I was out until 1 a.m. last night keeping people in this neighborhood from freezing. 4 emergency calls. Do you want to know how many of those could have been prevented with proper maintenance? All of them. But I can't do proper maintenance if I don't have supplies. Not my problem, she said. You knew the rules. Something in me snapped. Not violently, but a cold, calculated anger settled in. You're right, I said calmly. I did know the rules. And you know what else I know? I know exactly how much heating oil every house in this neighborhood uses. I know which furnaces are old and inefficient. I know who's overdue for service. And I know that I'm the only heating fuel supplier within 15 miles who offers 24-hour emergency service. Her expression faltered slightly. Are you threatening me? Not at all, I said. I'm just stating facts. You want to fine me for running my business, go ahead, but understand that actions have consequences. I went inside, my heart pounding. Emma met me at the door. That sounded ominous. I didn't threaten her, I said. I just made it clear that she's biting the hand that literally keeps her warm. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated. Patricia sent me a formal invoice for $10,000 in fines. I responded through my lawyer with a formal challenge, citing improper notice and selective enforcement. She responded by threatening to place a lien on my house. I filed a complaint with the Vermont Office of Professional Regulation, which oversees HOA conduct. The weather got worse. A massive cold front moved through, bringing sustained temperatures below zero and wind chills approaching -40. My phone rang constantly with service calls and emergency deliveries. I was running on 4 hours of sleep per night, trying to keep up with demand while also dealing with the HOA situation. Then, on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after the original ban, I got a call from the community center. The furnace had stopped working. I arrived to find the building freezing. The HOA board had a meeting scheduled that evening, and about a dozen people used the space for various activities throughout the day. Patricia was there, looking furious. "This is your fault," she said immediately. "You're the one who installed this system." I checked the furnace, already knowing what I'd find. "You're out of fuel." "That's impossible. We have automatic delivery." "You have automatic delivery from Morrison's Fuel based out of Waterbury," I said. "They were supposed to deliver yesterday, did they?" Patricia pulled out her phone and made a call. I could hear the conversation, or at least her end of it. Her face went pale. "They can't deliver until next week," she said after hanging up. "Their trucks are all deployed to emergency calls in other areas. They said this is their busiest time in 20 years. "I could deliver," I said. "I have fuel available. How much?" "I can have 1,000 gallons here this afternoon, enough to last you through the cold snap." She looked at me, and I could see her calculating, weighing her pride against the practical need to keep the community center functional. "How much will it cost?" I gave her my standard rate, which was actually slightly lower than Morrison's. She pulled out her phone again, clearly trying to find alternatives, but I knew what she'd discover. Every fuel supplier in the region was slammed. Some were quoting wait times of a week or more for non-emergency deliveries. "Fine," she said finally. "But this doesn't change anything about the violations." "Wouldn't dream of suggesting it did," I said. I had Marcus bring the fuel truck that afternoon. We filled the community center's tank, got the furnace running again, and left. Patricia didn't say thank you. That evening's HOA meeting was tense. Patricia opened by announcing that she'd secured heating fuel for the community center, conveniently leaving out where it came from. Then she moved to her next agenda item. "We need to discuss the ongoing violations by Aaron Quincy," she said. "To date, he's accumulated $20,000 in fines for unauthorized commercial deliveries. The board needs to vote on placing a lien on his property to secure payment. I stood up. Before you vote, I want everyone here to know something. Patricia called me this morning because the community center was out of fuel and Morrison's couldn't deliver. I delivered 1,000 gallons this afternoon. That delivery violated your winter ban. So technically, Patricia authorized a violation. The room went silent. Patricia's face turned crimson. That was an emergency situation. Every delivery I receive is related to emergency situations, I countered. I don't order supplies for fun. I order them because people need heat, and I need supplies to provide that heat. Keith Stanton spoke up. Aaron's got a point, Patricia. This ban is starting to look pretty short-sighted. We voted on this, Patricia snapped. The decision is made. We can vote to unmake it, Brenda Wu said quietly. I move that we suspend the winter delivery ban pending further review. Second, Keith said immediately. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. This is inappropriate. We can't just change rules because one person complains. Actually, we can, Dennis said, finally showing some backbone. That's how democracy works, Patricia. Let's vote. The vote was 3-2, with Patricia and Yolanda voting against suspension. The ban was lifted, pending a committee review to develop more reasonable commercial activity guidelines. I should have felt relieved, but I knew Patricia well enough to know she wouldn't let this go. I was right. 2 days later, I received a notice that the HOA was pursuing the $20,000 in fines for violations that occurred before the suspension. According to Patricia's letter, those fines were valid under the rules as they existed at the time, regardless of the subsequent suspension. David, my lawyer, confirmed that she had a technical legal argument. The fines were assessed under rules that were in effect at the time of the violations. The fact that the rules were later suspended doesn't automatically invalidate previous enforcement. So I'm on the hook for 20 grand. Maybe. But here's the thing, we can argue that the rules were improperly implemented in the first place, which would invalidate all fines. It'll require going to court though. How much will that cost? Probably $10,000 to $15,000 in legal fees, maybe more if it drags out. I sat in my office, looking at my options. Pay $20,000 in fines I couldn't afford or spend $15,000 fighting them with no guarantee of winning. Either way, Patricia was costing me a fortune. Then Marcus walked in with an interesting piece of information. Hey, I was talking to my cousin who works at the town clerk's office. Did you know that HOAs in Vermont have to register annually and maintain certain insurance coverage? It's a relatively new law from 2023. So I asked him to look up Pine Ridge Estates. Your HOA's registration expired 4 months ago. They're not currently a legally valid entity. I stared at him. Are you serious? Dead serious. Which means any actions they've taken in the past 4 months, including those fines, are potentially invalid. I called David immediately and relayed the information. He did some quick research and called me back within an hour, practically laughing. Aaron, your friend is right. The Vermont HOA Registration Act of 2023 requires all HOAs to register with the Secretary of State's office and maintain liability insurance. Failure to register doesn't dissolve the HOA, but it does mean they can't enforce rules or assess fines until they're compliant. And here's the beautiful part, the registration requirement includes a notice provision. The HOA has to notify all homeowners when registration lapses. Did you receive any such notice? No. Then they've violated state law. Not only are those fines invalid, but you could potentially sue them for attempted collection of invalid debts. Plus, any homeowner in the neighborhood could refuse to pay HOA dues until the association is properly registered. This changed everything. I prepared a detailed response to Patricia's fine notice, citing the registration issue and demanding immediate withdrawal of all fines. I sent copies to every member of the HOA board, and just for good measure, to every homeowner in the neighborhood via email. The response was immediate and explosive. Turns out, a lot of people in Pine Ridge Estates had grievances with Patricia's reign, but had been too intimidated to speak up. Learning that the HOA had been operating illegally for 4 months opened the floodgates. Within 48 hours, a petition circulated calling for Patricia's removal from the board. Within a week, an emergency meeting was scheduled. The community center was packed, standing room only. Patricia sat at the front table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The meeting was contentious. Homeowner after homeowner stood up to detail Patricia's overreach, petty enforcement, and the general atmosphere of fear she'd created. The unregistered HOA issue was just the catalyst. People had been waiting for an excuse to revolt. I got fined $500 because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black, one man said. Patricia made me bring paint swatches to prove compliance. She threatened to fine me because my daughter's birthday party had cars parked on the street, a woman added. It was a Saturday afternoon. She tried to ban my therapy dog, another homeowner said. Claimed it violated the pet size restrictions, even though therapy animals are specifically exempt under federal law. The stories went on for over an hour. Patricia tried to defend herself, arguing that she was just enforcing the rules everyone had agreed to, but the crowd wasn't buying it. When the vote came to remove her from the board, it was nearly unanimous. Only Yolanda voted against it. Brenda Wu was elected as the new board president. Her first act was to formally withdraw all outstanding fines against me and apologize on behalf of the HOA. Her second was to direct the board to immediately bring the HOA into compliance with state registration requirements. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Brenda. Aaron, we have a problem. When we filed for registration, the state required us to submit our financial records. Our accountant found some irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The kind that involve missing money. About $60,000 worth. My stomach dropped. And you think Patricia, we don't know yet. But she was the treasurer for the past 3 years and she had sole access to the accounts. We've reported it to the state and they're investigating. I wanted to give you a heads up because, well, you were her primary target lately. If she was embezzling, she might try to claim it was for legal fees related to your case or something. I never cost the HOA a dime in legal fees, I said. I paid for my own lawyer. I know. Just wanted you to be aware. The investigation moved forward. State auditors combed through the HOA's financial records going back 5 years. What they found was a systematic pattern of theft. Patricia had been using the HOA debit card for personal expenses, hiding the charges by categorizing them as maintenance costs, legal fees, and administrative expenses. The money had paid for vacations, shopping sprees, and even renovations to her own house that she'd claimed were for HOA business. The state's attorney got involved. Patricia was charged with embezzlement, theft by deception, and filing false documents. The amounts involved elevated it from a misdemeanor to felony territory. I watched the criminal proceedings with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because she'd been such a nightmare. Sadness because it was a stupid, wasteful way to destroy your life. Patricia had a good job as a pharmaceutical sales rep, a nice house, a seemingly stable life, and she'd thrown it away to steal money from her neighbors. The trial happened in late spring. I was called as a witness, Not about the embezzlement, but about Patricia's pattern of behavior and enforcement actions. The prosecutor wanted to establish that she'd used her HOA position as a personal fiefdom, retaliating against anyone who crossed her. I testified about the winter delivery ban, the selective enforcement, and the invalid fines. Other homeowners testified about their experiences. The picture that emerged was of someone who'd become drunk on the tiny bit of power the HOA presidency provided. Patricia was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, with credit for time served, and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her house went up for sale to cover the restitution and legal fees. Life in Pine Ridge Estates gradually returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. Brenda proved to be a reasonable, measured HOA president. She assembled a committee to review all the HOA rules and eliminate the petty, restrictive ones. The winter delivery ban was formally removed from the books. New guidelines were established for home-based businesses that were actually reasonable, focused on genuine nuisances rather than arbitrary restrictions. My business thrived. Word got around about what had happened, and I picked up new customers who appreciated a supplier willing to stand up to unreasonable demands. The publicity, while uncomfortable at times, turned out to be good for business. Emma and I discussed moving, but ultimately decided to stay. We loved our house, loved the neighborhood when it wasn't being run like a dictatorship, and our roots were there. Sophie started preschool at the community center, the same building whose furnace I'd fixed during that cold snap. On a Friday evening in June, almost 5 months after Patricia's initial visit to my door, I was grilling dinner in the backyard when Brenda stopped by with her husband and their 2 kids. "Hope we're not interrupting," she said. "I wanted to drop off some cookies as a thank you. The HOA board voted to give you a formal commendation for your service to the neighborhood during the winter." "That's really not necessary," I said, though I appreciated the gesture. "It absolutely is," she replied. "You stood up when the rest of us were too afraid or too apathetic. And you kept people safe and warm when it mattered. That deserves recognition." Her kids ran off to play with Sophie, and we all ended up having dinner together, talking about everything except HOAs and heating fuel. It was normal, neighborly, the way things should have been all along. Marcus called later that night with news that we'd landed a contract to supply fuel for the entire Stowe Mountain Resort employee housing complex. It was the biggest account we'd ever had. "You know what's funny?" he said. "The facilities manager said he chose us specifically because he heard about how we handled the HOA situation, said he wanted to work with someone who had integrity." "There's a sentence I never expected to hear," I said. "Integrity and HOA in the same breath. Times change, man. You changed them." I didn't think I'd changed anything, really. I just refused to accept an unreasonable situation and stood my ground. But maybe that was enough. Maybe that was exactly what was needed. The summer passed peacefully. I used the slower season to upgrade my equipment, hire another technician to help with the growing workload, and spend more time with Emma and Sophie. We took a vacation to Cape Cod, the first real vacation I'd taken since starting the business. When fall arrived and the temperatures started dropping again, I felt none of the dread I'd experienced the previous year. The first fuel delivery of the season arrived on a crisp October morning. No Patricia appeared with her clipboard, no threats of fines. Just a normal delivery to a normal house in a normal neighborhood. Marcus and I stood watching the truck pull away, and he raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. To surviving HOA tyranny and living to tell the tale. "I'll drink to that," I said, clinking my mug against his. The phone rang. "Mrs. Chen, 3 streets over, needed her furnace serviced before winter hit full force. I grabbed my tool bag and headed out. Just another day in the heating fuel business. Just another service call in a neighborhood that had finally figured out what actually mattered. As I drove through Pine Ridge Estates, I passed Patricia's old house. A young couple had bought it, newcomers to the area. They'd introduced themselves a few weeks earlier, excited about their first home. I'd given them my business card, told them to call if they ever needed anything. "We heard there was some HOA drama last year," the husband had said, "but everyone says it's great now." "It is," I'd assured him. "Just took some people standing up for common sense." That's what it all came down to, really. Common sense. The idea that rules should serve people, not the other way around. That a little bit of power shouldn't become an excuse for petty tyranny. That neighbors should help neighbors, especially in a Vermont winter when the temperature drops below zero and everyone needs to stay warm. I pulled into Mrs. Chen's driveway and grabbed my tools. The furnace needed a new igniter, a quick replacement that would keep her comfortable through the cold months ahead. As I worked, I thought about how much had changed in less than a year. Patricia was in prison, her reputation destroyed, her life in ruins, over $60,000 and a need to control everyone around her. The HOA had been reformed, its rules made reasonable, its leadership accountable. My business had grown beyond what I'd imagined possible. And the neighborhood, this little corner of Vermont that had been such a source of stress and conflict, had become what it should have been all along, a community. Mrs. Chen paid me and thanked me profusely, insisting I take home some homemade dumplings. I accepted gratefully, knowing Emma would be thrilled. As I drove home in the fading afternoon light, my phone buzzed with new service requests, new customers, new opportunities. The winter ahead would be busy. They always were in Vermont, where the cold came hard and stayed long. But I was ready for it. My inventory was stocked, my equipment was maintained, and my house received deliveries whenever I needed them, without fear of arbitrary fines or HOA retaliation. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my house. It was just a house, really. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a 2-car garage that doubled as business storage. Nothing fancy. But it was mine, and I defended it against someone who thought rules mattered more than people. Emma opened the front door, Sophie on her hip, both of them backlit by the warm glow from inside. I grabbed Mrs. Chen's dumplings and my tool bag and headed in, leaving the cold October evening behind. The heating season was starting again, and this time, I'd face it without the distraction of HOA nonsense. Just honest work, fair prices, and the satisfaction of keeping people warm when winter showed its teeth. That night, after Sophie was asleep and Emma and I were sitting on the couch watching a movie, my phone pinged with an email. It was from David, my lawyer, with a final update on the HOA situation. The state investigation had concluded, the restitution was being paid, and all legal matters related to Patricia's actions were resolved. There were no outstanding claims against me, no lingering issues, no loose ends. "It's really over," Emma said, reading the email over my shoulder. "It is," I agreed. "You think Patricia understands what she did wrong?" I thought about it. Probably not. People like that rarely do. They think they're the victims, that everyone else is the problem. That's sad. "It is," I said, "but it's not my problem anymore." We finished the movie and went to bed. Outside, the temperature was dropping into the 30s. In another month, it would be below zero again. The heating season would kick into full gear. People would need fuel, need service, need someone reliable to keep their homes warm and their families safe. I'd be there for them, just like always. No HOA ban could stop that now. No petty tyrant with a clipboard could prevent me from doing my job. The neighborhood had learned its lesson about letting one person accumulate too much unchecked power. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about that first conversation with Patricia on my front porch, her announcement that she was banning winter deliveries to a heating fuel supplier's house. It had seemed so absurd, so disconnected from reality, and in the end, reality had won. It always does, eventually. The next morning brought the first real frost of the season. Ice crystals covered the grass, and the windshields of cars parked outside were frozen over. I started my truck early to let it warm up while I loaded tools and supplies for the day's service calls. The phone rang as I was heading out. It was Dennis Morrison, the former HOA board member. "Aaron, morning. I wanted to let you know my furnace is making a funny noise." "Not an emergency, but could you take a look when you get a chance?" "I can swing by this afternoon," I said. "Probably around 3, perfect. And Aaron, I wanted to apologize for not standing up to Patricia sooner. A lot of us should have, but we didn't. You shouldn't have had to fight that battle alone. Water under the bridge, Dennis, but I appreciate you saying it. Still, you did this neighborhood a favor, even if it didn't seem like it at the time." I hung up and climbed into my truck, Marcus already in the passenger seat with his tablet showing the day's schedule. 14 service calls, 3 new installations, and 2 consultations for system upgrades. A typical November day in the heating fuel business. "Big day," Marcus said. "You ready?" "Always am," I replied, pulling out of my driveway where a delivery truck would arrive later that afternoon with supplies I'd ordered. No one would complain. No one would take pictures. No one would threaten fines. Just another delivery to just another house in just another neighborhood where common sense had finally prevailed over petty tyranny. And really, that's all I'd ever wanted. The chance to run my business, support my family, and help my neighbors stay warm through the brutal Vermont winters. As we drove through Pine Ridge Estates toward our first call of the day, the sun was just coming up over the mountains, painting the frost-covered world in shades of gold and orange. It was going to be a good winter. I could feel it. The HOA nightmare was over, and the real work, the important work, could continue. That's what mattered. Not rules and regulations and fines, but people helping people, neighbors supporting neighbors, and communities that functioned the way they were supposed to. Patricia had tried to ban winter deliveries to my house, thinking her authority was absolute. She'd learned the hard way that authority without wisdom is just tyranny, and tyranny never lasts. The neighborhood had learned it too, and we were all better for it. I turned up the heat in the truck as we headed toward our first customer, ready for whatever the winter would bring.